My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 58. The morning we buried my husband, before the dirt had even settled, my sister leaned across the casket spray of white lilies, put her warm hand on mine like she was comforting me, and whispered that the life insurance money should go to someone who'll actually use it. She meant herself. She said it in the voice you'd use to offer someone a tissue. What none of them knew, not Diane, not my mother, not the cousins already pricing out their cuts, was that David had restructured everything 11 months before the diagnosis, and the $340,000 they were circling like gulls had not been mine to give away for almost a year. It sat inside an irrevocable trust, with my name on the line that mattered, signed in front of a notary named Patrice in a strip mall office off Route 9. They were fighting over a door that had already been welded shut. Before I tell you how Diane found that out, in a room full of people she'd invited specifically to watch her win, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Let me go back. You have to understand who we were before you can understand the luncheon. I am the younger sister by 4 years, which in my family meant I was the one who showed up. Diane was the bright one, the pretty one, the one teachers wrote notes home about because she lit up a room, and I was the one who stayed after to stack the chairs. That was the architecture of us from the beginning, and nobody ever questioned the blueprint. Our father died when I was 19, heart, in the driveway, on a Tuesday in October. Before the ambulance came, he grabbed my wrist, not Diane's, mine, and he said, "Ellie, you watch the money. Your mother and your sister will spend the sky if you let them." Those were close to the last clear words he said. I have carried that sentence for 39 years like a stone in a coat pocket. I'll come back to it. It matters more than I knew at the time. After he was gone, the roles only hardened. When our mother needed her roof redone in 2009, it was my checkbook, $11,000, and Diane's name on the thank you card she posted to Facebook. So grateful for my generous family, with a photo of just the two of them on the new shingles. I wasn't in the frame. I had paid for the frame. When Diane's first marriage collapsed, she stayed in my guest room for 14 months. I drove her to the lawyer. I watched her kids on the weekends. The Christmas she finally moved out, she gave a toast at dinner thanking everyone who believed in me, and named our mother, her best friend Carol, and her therapist. She did not name me. I was refilling the water glasses when she said it. I learned to be useful and invisible at the same time. It's a particular skill. You get very good at it, and nobody ever thanks you for the one thing you're best at, because being good at it means no one notices it's happening. Then I met David. I was 41. He was 44, a structural engineer who inspected bridges and dams for the state, a quiet man who measured things twice and spoke once. On our second date, he asked me what I wanted, and when I started to answer with what other people wanted from me, he stopped me and said, "No, you." Nobody had ever made the distinction before. I married him 18 months later in a courthouse with 2 witnesses, and Diane told 3 different people the wedding was a little sad, honestly, for someone her age. David and I had 17 years. Not perfect. Real. He understood my family the way he understood a load-bearing wall. He knew exactly where the stress went, and exactly how much weight it could hold before something cracked. He used to say my family treated me like a foundation, necessary, buried, and never admired. He got sick in the spring of 2024, pancreatic. By the time they found it, the language the doctors used had already changed from treat to time. Here is the part that matters. David spent his career making sure structures didn't fail the people standing on them. And in the 11 months between his diagnosis and his death, he did to our finances what he'd done to bridges his whole life. He stress-tested them. He asked one question over and over, in the kitchen, in waiting rooms, in the car, when I'm gone, what happens the first time your sister asks for money? I told him Diane wouldn't. I actually said that. He looked at me the way you look at someone standing on a beam that's already groaning. So he built something, quietly. The diagnosis was the gift becoming a weapon. Except in our case, David made sure the weapon stayed pointed the right way. He had a life insurance policy through his state pension, $340,000, with me as the named beneficiary. A simple thing. A check that would land in my account about 6 weeks after he died. Diane knew the number. Everyone in my family knew the number, because my mother cannot hold a figure in her mouth without spitting it across the family. $340,000. Say it twice and it starts to sound like a thing people are owed. What David did, 11 months before he died, with a lawyer named Marcus Reyes, whose office is on the 4th floor of a building downtown, with a coffee cart in the lobby, was create an irrevocable living trust. He moved the policy's payout structure into it. He named me trustee and sole beneficiary, with specific, written, legally binding instructions about how the funds were to be held and used. Once it was signed, even David couldn't undo it. That's what irrevocable means. It cannot be argued with, guilted out of, or borrowed against by anyone whose name isn't on it. He did it because he knew. He knew the way you know a bridge is going to fail before the public does, from the small sounds. The funeral was on a Thursday. The whisper at the casket was Diane's opening move. By the following Monday, she'd escalated to phone calls. By the second week, she'd built an entire moral framework around my husband's death, and the framework was this: that I was a childless widow with a paid-off house and a pension, that I didn't need the money, and that Diane, newly divorced again, drowning in a second mortgage on a house she couldn't afford, was the one with real obligations. 2 kids in college. A life that actually had people in it. That was the phrase that did it. Someone who'll actually use it. She used it again on that call, and then a third time, and each time it was sharpened a little more. Here's the thing about a word repeated by someone who underestimates you. They think they're driving it into you like a nail. They don't realize they're handing you the hammer. She wanted the $340,000. She believed it was already practically hers, because in our family's blueprint, whatever Eleanor had, Diane was entitled to need more. Then came the messages. And the messages are where she made her mistake. Diane is a texter. She always has been. She fires off thoughts faster than she thinks them, and she has never once in her life imagined that anything she sends could be read by anyone but the person she's angry at in the moment. Over about 3 weeks I received, without asking for a single one, a complete documented record of exactly what she was doing. There was the text to me, sweet as syrup, about how David would have wanted family taken care of. Then, because Diane had added me to a family group chat years ago and forgotten the cardinal rule of group chats, there was the message she meant to send only to our mother, which landed in front of everyone for 90 seconds before she deleted it. I screenshotted it. It said, "She'll fold. She always folds. Just keep telling her it's selfish to sit on that kind of money. By the memorial lunch she'll be offering it just to make us stop." The memorial lunch. So there was a plan, and there was a deadline, and there was a venue. That message was the smoking gun. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't grief making people clumsy. It was a strategy, with a timeline, aimed at a grieving woman, and she'd put it in writing. I sat with that screenshot for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage. It was something quieter and much colder. It was the feeling of a door closing very gently. The feeling of finally being allowed to stop pretending. I called Marcus Reyes the next morning. I told him everything. The whisper, the calls, the framework, the group chat message, the lunch. He listened the way good lawyers listen, which is to say he didn't react at all until I was finished. Then he said one thing I have repeated to myself 100 times since. He said, "Eleanor, the most dangerous kind of thief is the one who's convinced that needing something is the same as being owed it. You don't have to take anything from her. You just have to stop letting her take from a version of you that no longer exists." He explained, slowly, what was already true. The trust was irrevocable. The money was protected. There was no document Diane could sign, no guilt she could apply, no version of this where she got a cent unless I personally chose to write her a check from my own funds, which was a separate decision entirely, and entirely mine. And then he said the thing that turned a defense into a plan. He said, "You can keep explaining this to her in private forever, and she will never believe you, because she doesn't want to. Or you can let the document explain it once, in front of the people whose opinion she's actually trying to manage. No shouting. No sabotage. No revenge in the way Diane would have understood revenge. Just a fact, a piece of paper, and the right room. The plan was the memorial luncheon, her venue, her deadline, her audience. I would simply make sure the truth arrived on schedule. I want to be clear about what I did not do, because the restraint is the whole point. I did not confront Diane. I did not send the screenshot back to her. I did not call our mother and scream. I did not post anything. For 3 weeks I let Diane believe the plan was working. I let her think I was folding. When she called, I said, "I don't know, Diane. It's a lot to think about," in the small, tired voice she expected from me. I let her build the entire stage. I just made sure I'd be the one who decided what happened on it. I asked Marcus to prepare 2 things. A 1-page, plain language notarized summary of the trust, what it was, when it was created, who controlled it, and the single sentence that mattered, that the funds were irrevocably committed and could not be distributed to any party outside the trust's terms. And a sealed letter that David had written 11 months before he died, which Marcus had been holding, to be opened if it ever became necessary. Marcus had never told me what was in it. David had told him I'd know when the time came. The memorial luncheon was held at the Glenmore Room, a private dining space attached to a restaurant on the east side, the kind with heavy drapes and a long single table that seats 26. Diane organized it. Of course she did. She wanted the optics of the grieving family rallying around the widow. She wanted witnesses to my generosity. She seated herself at the head of the table, beside our mother, and she seated me, the widow, at my own husband's memorial, 3 seats down, near the end, by the door. I noticed. I said nothing. I have spent my whole life seated near the door. The lunch began at 1 o'clock. I want to walk you through what happened minute by minute, because the timing is the whole architecture of it. At 1:12 p.m., Diane stood and tapped her glass. She gave a speech about David. It was a good speech, technically. She's always been good in a room. She talked about loss, and about how grief should bring families closer, and about how in times like these, the truest thing we can do is take care of each other, even when it's hard, even when it means letting go of things we're holding too tightly. She looked at me on that last part. So did half the table. The framework, delivered to the jury. At 1:19 p.m., she got to the ask, dressed as a blessing. She said she'd been talking with our mother, and the family felt it was important that David's legacy go toward life, toward the grandchildren, toward the future, toward people building something. She said she knew I would do the right thing. She raised her glass to me, to the widow who was about to be generous on cue. At 1:21 p.m., I stood up. I want to tell you what composure costs in a moment like that, because it isn't nothing. My hands were not steady. My husband had been dead for 5 weeks. Every cell in my body wanted to either weep or burn the room down. I did neither. I reached into my bag, and I took out a plain manila envelope, and I set it on the table. I did not raise my voice. I have never raised my voice in my life, and I wasn't going to start at my husband's memorial. I said, "Thank you, Diane. Before I respond, I'd like to read something. It's short." And then I let the document speak. I read the 1-page summary. Plain language. The trust was created in May of 2024. It was irrevocable. The funds in question were committed to it as of that date. They could not be distributed, gifted, redirected, or borrowed against by any individual outside the terms of the trust. The trustee, me, had no legal authority to give the money away, even if she wanted to. I read the notary's name. I read the date. I set it down. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet a room has to lean in to hear. Then I did the thing I'd thought about for 3 weeks. I didn't accuse her. I didn't have to. I looked down the table at my sister and I said, "I know some of you have been told I'd be sitting on this money. I want to be clear. It was never mine to sit on. David decided where it would go almost a year before he died. He decided when he was still well enough to think clearly about who in this family confuses access with ownership." That last phrase landed, because 3 people at that table had heard Diane use the word access about my finances, weeks earlier, at my mother's house. I knew that because David's sister-in-law had told me. Diane had said, and I'm quoting, "Once she has access to that kind of money, it's family money." I gave the word back to her. Same word, inverted. And then I opened the second envelope, David's letter. I had not read it. Marcus had handed it to me sealed that morning. I broke the seal at the table, and I read it aloud cold, and I'm grateful no one warned me what was in it, because I could not have read it if I'd known. It was short. David didn't waste words even at the end. He'd written it to be read in exactly this situation. He'd known. He'd always known. And the line that broke the room was the second to last one. He wrote, Eleanor, if you're reading this out loud, it means someone you love decided your grief was a good time to do business. I'm sorry. I built this so you'd never have to choose between being kind and being safe. You don't owe anyone proof that you deserve what I left you. The proof is that I left it. And then the last line. Watch the money, Ellie. Your father told you that. He was right. My father's words. David had known about my father's words. I'd told him once, years ago, in the dark, and he'd kept that sentence the way I'd kept it, folded, in a pocket, for the right day. Nobody at that table knew what to do with their faces. There was no shouting. There was no scene, not the kind Diane could have survived by playing the victim of. There was just a piece of paper, and a dead man's handwriting, and the slow, visible understanding, spreading down a long table, that the woman they'd seated by the door had been telling the truth, and the woman at the head of the table had been managing them. My cousin Renee, who is not aligned with anyone, who just shows up to things and watches, set down her fork and said, into the silence, the question that finished it. She said, quietly, to no one in particular, Diane, did you know about the trust? And Diane's face answered before her mouth could. Because of course she'd known. Marcus had sent a courtesy notification to the family beneficiaries of record back in 2024. A standard letter, the kind people skim and file. Diane had received it. She'd known the money was locked for almost a year. She'd built the entire campaign anyway, gambling that I'd fold before anyone checked the paperwork. Renee asked it again, gently, the way you'd ask a child. Did you know? Diane said. It's complicated. It was not complicated. Here is what fell, beam by beam, in the weeks after. Diane had been telling people, our mother's church friends, her own social circle, the family, a story in which she was the practical, loving sister, stepping in to manage a fragile widow's windfall. That story died at the Glenmore Room at approximately 1:24 in the afternoon, and it could not be revived, because 11 witnesses had watched it die. My mother, who had backed Diane's framework, spent the following month discovering that her friends had quietly recalibrated who they thought she was. That was a consequence she had genuinely earned, and I won't pretend I was sorry. But I'll tell you the consequence I was sorry about, because the truth has texture and I promised myself I'd tell it honestly. Diane's son, my nephew, Caleb, 19, a good kid, genuinely a good kid, who had nothing to do with any of it, had been told by his mother that Aunt Ellie's helping with college. He'd been counting on it. He found out at that lunch, in front of everyone, that there had never been a plan, that his mother had spent money in her imagination that was never coming, and that the shortfall she'd manufactured was now his problem. He was humiliated, and he hadn't done a single thing to deserve it. That one sits with me. I made sure, later and privately, that it got handled, but I'll come back to that. Diane's first move was the non-apology. 3 days after the lunch, she sent a long message to the family group, the same group chat, she never learns, that used the word miscommunication 4 times and the word sorry 0 times. It was a PR statement. It blamed grief, old family dynamics, and, somehow, me, for choosing to make a private matter public. It landed like a wet match. Even our mother didn't defend it. The family had seen the document. You can't miscommunication your way out of a notarized date. The real admission came later. Partial. Incomplete, but real. People ask me if I felt triumphant, walking out of that room. I didn't. I want to be precise about this. I didn't feel like I'd won, because there was no version of this where I won. My husband was still dead, and my sister was still my sister, and a 19-year-old I loved had been collateral. What I felt was not triumph. I felt clean, and I felt unbelievably tired. It was not relief. It was the absence of a weight I'd carried so long I'd stopped feeling it as weight, and started feeling it as my own spine. Setting it down didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing up straight for the first time in 58 years. Let me take you forward. 8 months later, the trust held, exactly as David built it. I never touched the principal for anything frivolous, because that wasn't what it was for. David's written instructions were specific, and they were generous in a way that had nothing to do with Diane. He'd structured it so that a portion could be used for Eleanor's continued life, and a portion was designated for something he and I had talked about in those last months, but never finished planning. David inspected bridges. His whole life was making sure the thing people stood on wouldn't drop them. So I used part of the trust to start a small fund, modest, nothing grand, that helps widows and widowers in our county get 1 free consultation with an estate attorney in the first 90 days after a death. 90 days, because that's the window when people are most vulnerable to exactly what was done to me. When grief makes you generous, and someone who loves you decides it's a good time to do business. I named it after him, the Whitfield 90-Day Fund. It's not big. It helped 41 families in its first year. David would have called that a good load test. I did not spend $1 on revenge. I never had to. The document did the only work that needed doing. About my nephew, Caleb. 6 months after the lunch, he came to see me on his own. Not sent, not coached, just a kid who drove 2 hours to sit at my kitchen table. He apologized for things that were never his to apologize for. And then he said the plainest, truest sentence anyone in my family has said to me in 40 years. He said, "I was wrong about you. Mom told me you were cold. You're not cold. You're just done being everyone's foundation." He used the word David used. He didn't know that. He couldn't have known that. I had to leave the room for a minute. I'm paying for the rest of his school. Quietly. From my own money. Not the trust. That distinction matters to me. Not because his mother asked. Because I decided. That's the difference David spent 11 months building into the architecture of my life. The difference between giving because you're guilted and giving because you choose. They look identical from the outside. They are opposite things on the inside. And Diane? We are not healed. I want to be honest about that, because I think the clean bow version of this story would be a lie, and you've stayed with me this long, so you deserve the true one. My sister and I are not reconciled. We speak at the obligatory things, a funeral, a graduation, the edges of the holidays. She has never given me a real apology, and I have stopped needing one, which is its own kind of freedom and its own kind of grief. But once, at Caleb's 20th birthday, in a kitchen, drying dishes side by side the way we did as girls, she said, not looking at me, looking at the plate in her hands, "I confused needing it with deserving it. I think I've done that my whole life." That was all. No ornament, no performance. Just one true sentence, finally, after 58 years. I said, "I know." And I dried the next plate. And that was the most honest conversation my sister and I have ever had, and it lasted 9 words, and I'm not sure we'll ever have a better one. That's not a happy ending. It's a real one. I've made my peace with the difference. On my mantel now there's the envelope. David's letter, the one I read at the table. I keep it the way my father's sentence lived in my coat pocket all those years. Folded. Close. For the days I need to remember. Some nights I take it out and read the last line. "Watch the money, Ellie. Your father told you that. He was right. 2 men who loved me, 39 years apart, told me the same true thing. It took me until 58 to hear it. So let me say the thing this story is really about. To you, directly. You can be the most loving, the most reliable, the most giving person in your entire family. And the people who benefit from that will quietly teach themselves that your generosity is an obligation, not a gift. They'll come to treat your composure as availability. And the moment you finally protect what's yours, they will call you cold and selfish and changed. Let them. Changed is what they call you when you stop being convenient. Document what's yours. Protect the people who can't protect themselves. And understand the difference between giving because you chose to and giving because someone made you feel like a monster for hesitating. That difference is your whole life. Guard it. If you were sitting at that table, 3 seats from the head, near the door, with the document in your bag. Would you have read it out loud? Or would you have folded one more time just to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments. And if someone in your life has ever confused needing something with being owed it, comment the word boundary below. I read them, and I think we find each other in there. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection, but the lesson underneath it is not invented. Kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's just a door someone learns to walk through. Build the door, decide who you let in, and never let your grief become someone else's opportunity.